The door to the police station suddenly opened. A bloody German shepherd, dragging an injured leg, clutching an old backpack. Inside was evidence of saving a child's life and revealing a cruel plot, with a determined look in his eyes, as if giving a final order. But it made the whole country choke. What really happened to the dog named Axel? The morning in Cedar Ridge had started like any other, quietly, veiled in mist, with the faint scent of pine drifting in from the northern hills. Inside the town's police outpost, the soft, steady click of a typewriter kept rhythm with the hush of routine. The slow heartbeat of a town so familiar with stillness, it had almost forgotten how to brace for chaos. No one on shift that morning, not the officers reviewing reports, not the dispatcher sipping stale coffee, could have imagined that within moments their entire world would be flipped inside out, with no warning and no mercy. Then came the sound. The front doors slamming open, not with the usual polite creak, but with a rush of wind and a metallic scent no one could name without flinching. Every head turned, and in that instant, time seemed to crack and freeze in place. Stumbling in through the threshold was a shape cloaked in blood and mud. A German shepherd, once regal in build and coat, now stained by struggle. Crimson streaks clung to its underbelly and flanks like ink bleeding through old parchment. Its hind leg dragged with each painful step, leaving a dark, broken trail of red across the pale wooden floor. Clenched in its jaws was a torn, dust-covered backpack, its straps frayed as if it had been dragged through hell and back. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Because the weight of what they were seeing couldn't be trusted. It was too surreal, too raw to accept right away. Officer Nathan Hale was the first to break the silence. His voice, steady in most emergencies, cracked at the edges now, as if tangled with disbelief. "Axel?" he whispered. Not like calling a dog, but like speaking to a ghost. The dog paused in the center of the room, eyes sunken but still burning with something fierce, something ancient. There was no leash, no sign of his handler, Lieutenant Walter Briggs. Only silence and blood. A low bark rasped from Axel's throat, hoarse, almost strangled. But he didn't collapse. He didn't look for help. Instead, Axel continued forward, every step deliberate, unwavering, until he reached the reception desk. There, he stopped, eyes locked onto Nathan. The message was clear in the stillness. "I came back. Now open it." Blood dripped slowly with each second, forming a jagged red path that led from the door to where Axel now stood. Nathan rushed from behind the counter and dropped to his knees beside the wounded dog. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He simply reached out and gently placed his hand on Axel's head, just above the long, raw gash near his ear. "Where's Walter?" he asked, voice barely above a breath, as if the answer might shatter him. Axel didn't respond, but he didn't release the backpack either. And in that grip, there was a truth louder than any bark. Something terrible has happened, and it's all in here. Behind them, the rest of the team snapped into motion. One officer reached for the emergency vet line. Another called the shift commander. Meanwhile, Axel finally released the backpack, letting it drop with a heavy thud to the floor before lowering himself onto the cold tile. His body trembled. His breath slowed. But his gaze never wavered from Nathan, as if begging him to take it from here. Nathan picked up the pack, immediately feeling the dampness of blood through the cloth. A lump rose in his throat, not just out of fear for Walter, but from the sheer awe of the dog before him. Axel had come home, not as a survivor, but as a messenger, as a soldier who had given everything to complete one final mission. "There's no way Axel made it back like this unless something's gone horribly wrong," Nathan muttered. And Walter would never let him go alone. A younger officer standing nearby spoke, hesitant and pale. "Their patrol vehicle never checked in, since early this morning." Nathan tightened his grip on the backpack, a cold dread blooming slowly beneath his ribs like fire moving beneath ice. He had seen Axel in tough shape before, but never like this. No mission had ever brought them back in pieces. Walter and Axel were inseparable, and they always returned together. But this time, only one did. A siren wailed outside. A veterinary unit pulled up, its doors flung open as two medics ran inside with a stretcher and gear. But Axel didn't move. He had no strength left. Nathan leaned in, whispering close to the dog's ear. "It's okay now, Axel. You did it. We've got it from here." And in that moment, as if those words gave him permission to let go, Axel collapsed, not in defeat, but in surrender. His body relaxed, his eyes half closed, but his chest still rose and fell, faint and fragile. The medics worked fast, slipping an IV into his leg, patching wounds, wrapping gauze. Everyone knew, if they had been even minutes later, Axel wouldn't have made it. The backpack was placed carefully on the conference table. No one dared unzip it yet. Not because of fear, but because of what it might reveal. A truth too heavy for words. But everyone understood one thing. Whatever was inside, it would change everything. Nathan looked out through the frosted glass as the first sliver of morning light crept across the roof of the station. He clutched the backpack tighter, then turned to the watch commander. "Prep the meeting room," he said quietly. "I'll open it in there. Then we go find Walter." Outside, the fog still clung to the earth, but from somewhere beyond, sunlight had begun to pierce the mist. And down the hall, Axel's stretcher disappeared into a room thick with antiseptic and machines, where between the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the scent of urgency, a life was being pulled back from the edge. Outside the window, the morning mist still lingered, clinging stubbornly to the contours of the landscape. But from the distant horizon, the first rays of sunlight had already begun to brush lightly against the rooftop of the police station, casting a fragile warmth upon the cold structure. And at the far end of the corridor, Axel's stretcher was slowly disappearing into a room thick with machines, where, amid the acrid scent of antiseptics and the rhythmic beat of a heart monitor, a life was being wrestled back from the thinnest edge of the unknown. In the central briefing room, the backpack Axel had brought back lay neatly on the table, still damp, its fabric at the bottom darkening into a deep brown where blood had soaked through, leaving behind a pungent scent, a chaotic blend of dust, sweat, and gunpowder. No one sat. A dozen officers stood encircling the table, their eyes fixed on the silent object as if it were the black box of a downed aircraft, something they all feared to open, unsure of what truths might be sealed within. Nathan stood at the center. Thin medical gloves clenched between his fingers, yet his breathing remained steady, calm, controlled, the way he always was when solving cases. No haste, no emotional distractions, even though this time the emotion wore the face of someone he once trusted, like blood and bone. He unzipped the bag. The sound, faint like the unraveling of thread, was the only noise against the thick silence. The first item retrieved was a baby blanket, pale pink, thin, stained with blood along the folded edge, and smeared with dirt along its body. Nathan held it with both hands, unfurling it across the table. No one needed to say a word. It was clear to all that not long ago, a fragile little life had been wrapped inside it. And the blood, warm, fresh, not yet dried, confirmed it. If the child was still alive, the hours separating them were countable, painfully few. A cold wave, sharp as a blade, swept through the room. A female officer turned away, eyes red. The second item, an old photograph, its colors faded yet still clear enough to reveal a young woman cradling a baby girl no more than a few months old. Both were smiling, an honest, unposed smile, sunlight casting a soft line across their shoulders. On the back, in smudged blue ink, a single handwritten line. Laya, the girl must be saved. No one spoke, but the air in the room shifted, shocked stillness giving way to urgent intensity. Next came a simple plastic-cased phone, one of those unregistered, numberless burners often used for temporary, untraceable contact. The battery still held power, but upon activation, the screen showed only a blank white display with one missed call, never completed. No messages, no call logs, no contacts. Like a box of silence, deliberately emptied of everything but purpose. He set it aside and reached for the final item in the main compartment. A small device wrapped in brown rubber, streaked with dried blood. A personal GPS tracker, the kind used in covert operations outside the department's official systems. Nathan powered it on. A green light blinked instantly. Steady, then paused, then blinked again. Rhythmic. One of the tech officers had already linked the projection system. Within seconds, coordinates appeared. Every gaze in the room snapped toward the blinking red dot, isolated in a remote stretch west of town. There, the technician said, voice taut. An abandoned warehouse. Used to belong to Gilmore Freight. Shut down since '78. Exactly 11.3 kilometers in a straight line. Nathan stared at the map. That location, it wasn't on Walter's patrol route for the day, which meant he had diverted, intentionally. And if Axel came back from there, it could only mean Walter had gone in alone, with no backup, no support, no report, a move that went against every operational rule of K9 protocol. A thought began to form. Faint at first, then rapidly spreading like flame through dry brush. Walter had been ambushed. He's not the kind of man to break protocol, Nathan said, his eyes still locked on the map. If he went there alone, it's because he found something big, and couldn't report it back. A junior officer flipped open the patrol log. His vehicle lost GPS signal at 4:27 a.m. Last registered ping was just south of the old timber market, around 3 kilometers from the warehouse. After that, nothing. Silence returned, heavy, oppressive. Nathan placed his hand on the table, as if trying to tether together every piece of the puzzle. Axel had brought all of this back, not by chance, but by design. And if Axel was coherent enough to return, it meant Walter had sent him. A decision made only when no other option remained. Suddenly, from the back door of the meeting room, a weak, rasping bark echoed. Small, strained. All heads turned. Axel lay on a stretcher being wheeled out of emergency, his legs still wrapped in white gauze, IV lines trembling at his neck. But his head was raised, eyes locked onto the projection screen, where the blinking red dot still pulsed steadily. He barked again, clearer this time, as if to say, "That's the place. That's where Walter is being held." Everything accelerated. Officers scrambled into action, forming teams, updating command, initiating emergency protocols. The vet tried to keep Axel from moving, but the dog struggled upward, his body leaning toward the map, as though urging, "Go now. There's still time." But not much. Nathan approached, knelt beside him, his hand resting gently on Axel's head, like a promise made between comrades. "We'll go, Axel," he said quietly. "Not just to find out, but to bring Walter home." In the corner of the room, the first beam of morning light reached the photo of the woman and child. The sunlight refracted across the foggy glass, forming a soft halo around the infant's face, like a quiet omen knocking on the door of what once seemed hopeless. And at that exact moment, the GPS device emitted a new sound, a sharper, steadier series of beeps, as though picking up a stronger signal. The screen shifted to real-time tracking. The coordinates were moving. Nathan stood upright, gaze fixed on the blinking map. Someone's moving it, not hiding it. It's like they're relocating or evacuating. His voice betrayed a rising urgency. A technician instantly tapped into the previous radio logs, digging into the K9 communication channels. We need to check every frequency used by Briggs before the signal dropped. He must have left something behind. Nathan nodded, a fragile thread of hope tightening in his chest. If Walter knew he might not return, he wouldn't let the truth die quietly. An old spool-type radio recorder was connected to the system. The audio crackled to life, static, wind, fragments of breath and movement, like the heartbeat of someone running or hiding in chaos. The technician adjusted the filters. The garbled sound began to clear, cutting through like knives. A voice, hoarse, raw, fraying between breath and fear. They took the girl. Everyone froze. The technician's hands clenched around the dial, eyes brimming from pressure. I might not make it back. If I don't trust Axel, he knows what to do. The message was severed by a loud explosion. The signal cut. Silence fell like stone. Someone cursed under their breath and turned away. An older officer leaned on the table, head bowed, shoulders shaking from held-back grief. Nathan stood motionless, eyes shut. The recording was less than 10 seconds long, but it weighed more than 1,000 reports, more than any written word, because it carried the final choice of a man staring into death, not to save himself, but to protect a child and a dog. No voices remained in the room, only the morning wind whispering through the cracks of the door. Someone turned off the overhead lights. The room dimmed, allowing that recording to echo forever in the stillness. A whisper, eternal, amidst the noise. Axel still lay in the hallway, surrounded by trolleys of medical supplies and the faded yellow light of the infirmary's ceiling lamps. His breath shallow, his body motionless save for the flick of an ear when the sound of Walter's voice, muffled yet unmistakable, drifted from the meeting room nearby. That voice, worn yet resolute, brushed against Axel's senses like a memory surfacing from deep water. Though exhaustion had pinned his ears flat for hours, they now rose. Just slightly, just enough, as if that familiar tone was enough to awaken something buried and waiting. The veterinarian, crouched gently beside him, stroked his head and whispered, "You hear him, don't you, little warrior?" Axel didn't bark. Instead, a faint breath passed his lips, still rapid, still faint, but steady. His eyes widened a little, not in fear but in longing, and locked onto the doorway as if expecting someone to walk through. The only one who had ever stood beside him through every storm. Nathan emerged, his hands holding a scratched, unmarked phone and a small photo worn from time. He knelt next to Axel, placing both items before the dog with deliberate care. "Walter knows. He believed in you, right up to the end," Nathan said, voice low but firm. "You didn't fail him." Axel didn't move, but his gaze shifted slowly. First to the photograph, a woman holding a child, their smiles quiet and full of life. Then to the scuffed phone, silent and cracked, as if it too had survived a fall from grace. Finally, Axel looked back at Nathan, and in that look was no fear, no blame, no plea, only the calm, unshaken silence of a soul who had endured pain but never once stopped believing. "We're going to get there, Axel," Nathan whispered, his words soft as wind through morning pines. "But you need to stay here. You've done enough." But somehow Axel didn't agree. He tried to lift his head, then shifted his weight, despite the IV lines tugging at his foreleg and the bruises blooming beneath the bandages. The veterinarian moved to restrain him, But Nathan raised a hand. Let him, if all he wants is to see. With visible effort, Axel lowered his chin onto his front paws, eyes locked on the emergency room's newly installed monitor, where a red GPS signal still blinked on screen. The dot was moving, slowly, confined to a 500-meter radius, with no signs of vehicles nearby. Someone, maybe Walter, was being dragged, carried, or led away unconscious. Not gone, but slipping further out of reach with every passing second. Nathan followed Axel's gaze, and in that look, he understood exactly what the dog was asking, even if no one else could hear it. Will we make it in time? He rose, turned to the command center, and spoke with the kind of voice that brooked no hesitation. I want an extraction team ready in 10. They're on the move. If we wait, we lose him. And this time, we go in with our eyes wide open. Behind him, Axel slowly closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in trust, like someone passing the torch to another's hand. The soft light pouring through the window fell across his back like a blanket, warm and silent, gentle as one last touch from the friend who hadn't returned yet. Then, without warning, the GPS screen blinked harder, its pulse rapid, almost urgent. The red dot stopped abruptly near the edge of the map, a grayed-out zone with no roads, no landmarks, no names. Just a blank space, a blind spot on the town's registry. A young officer murmured, barely louder than the breeze slipping through the doorframe. The last ping. It's coming from a storage barn, not on the property records. Nathan's fingers tightened around the strap of his rifle. Determination lit his eyes like a match struck in the dark. And down the corridor, Axel, though unable to stand, kept his eyes wide open, tracking Nathan's every step. The stretcher sat just inside the infirmary door, caught in the quiet chaos of officers suiting up, sliding into Kevlar, checking rifles, and muttering into radios. Axel didn't move, yet with every command shouted across the hall, his ears twitched and his nostrils flared, like muscle memory reawakening in a soldier built not just for obedience, but for instinct. Nathan was almost past him when the smallest sound, a dry, strained groan, cut through the air behind him. He turned. What he saw stopped his heart cold. Axel was trying to rise. The dog's hind leg, still wrapped in thick gauze, trembled with effort, while both front legs pressed down on the mattress, lifting his chest ever so slightly. His eyes, red with strain, bored into Nathan, not begging, not protesting, but demanding with a terrifying clarity, "Do not leave me behind." "Axel," Nathan said, voice cracking mid-breath. He moved toward him fast. Axel surged again. The 4 lines stretched beneath his skin. Monitors jittered. The vet rushed in, alarmed. "He can't. His internal bleeding's still active. One more shock to the system." Nathan raised a hand. Not to silence, but to ask for a moment. "Let me talk to him. Just 1 minute." The vet hesitated, then nodded and stepped back. Nathan knelt, lowering himself so their eyes met. Axel's breath was jagged, but his gaze never wavered. "You don't have to go, okay?" Nathan said, palm resting gently over Axel's chest, still warm beneath the fur. "You already did what no one else could. It's our turn now." But Axel didn't blink. Instead, his head leaned, almost imperceptibly, toward the door, where boots pounded the tile floor, magazines clicked into place, and men braced themselves for the unknown. "You want to go," Nathan whispered, as if suddenly seeing it for what it was. "Not because it's a mission, but because Walter is still out there." No one said a word. They didn't need to. Every man in the room had seen it before. That bond between a handler and his dog. Not something forged by leashes or commands, but by something far deeper. A trust welded in fire. A loyalty earned across years of shared breath, shared blood, and shared survival. The doctor sighed, his voice heavy with reluctant concession. If you insist, I'll administer a low-dose analgesic, but I can't guarantee he'll withstand any intense movement. Nathan gave a quiet nod, steady but resolute. He won't be in the fight. He's just coming along. And so, just minutes later, amidst the grumble of engines starting up, jeeps revving into action, and radios crackling with the roll call of tactical teams, Axel was carefully lifted into the command vehicle, wrapped gently in a thin blanket, placed right beside Nathan's feet. His head rested against the edge of the leather seat, eyes still open, gazing through the window as if returning to a place etched deep in memory. Familiar, undeniable. The convoy pulled out from Cedar Ridge Station at exactly 7:12 a.m. The sky still veiled in a soft, persistent mist, and the earth beneath remained soaked with the remnants of the night's rain. Pines blurred past the windows, retreating like echoes of old memories, while the road ahead, winding and uncertain, led ever closer to the nameless warehouse that had now become their compass. Inside the vehicle, not a single word was exchanged. Nathan rested a steady hand on Axel's back. The dog breathed lightly. No whimper, no struggle. Only his ears twitched now and then, rising slightly whenever they passed through pockets of shifting scent. Animal waste, old gasoline, or smoke. At one bend in the road, a draft swept through the cracked window. Axel inhaled deeply. Suddenly, his whole body tensed. His eyes widened. His nose began to twitch with unmistakable urgency. Nathan saw it instantly. "You smell something, don't you?" Axel stirred faintly, releasing a low, rumbling sound. Not a cry of pain, but confirmation. He remembered that scent, the acrid tang of spent gunpowder, the raw copper of fresh blood, and the chemical trace hidden beneath someone's skin, a scent of threat and violence he would never forget from the night before. Nathan turned to the officer behind the wheel. "Slow down. We're close." Axel turned his head, eyes sharpened not by pain, but by instinct. Something ancient, something ingrained after years of training and battle, rose within him, pulling him from the fragility of a patient back into the role of the K-9 who had once survived bullets, flames, and blood. Out the window, the silhouettes of weathered storage units began to emerge, corrugated roofs rusted with time, walls sagging, paint peeling like old scabs. But to Axel, those were not just abandoned buildings. They were the last place he saw Walter, the place where the final command rang out through smoke and fire. "Take this back! Don't return! Save the girl! You have to live, Axel!" He had done it. He had come back. But now, he was the one leading the way. As the convoy rolled to a halt, Axel drew in a deep breath, raised his head, and locked eyes with Nathan, an unspoken message clear in their gaze. He didn't just want to come along. He knew exactly where they needed to go. The thin forest encircling the warehouse exuded a cold, uncanny stillness. Dry leaves rustled faintly under the careful steps of the tactical teams dispersing into position. All radios were cut to hand signals. No voices, no noise, only nods, brief shoulder taps, and eyes sharpened with deadly focus. The main structure, where the GPS signal had ceased, sat at the heart of an open lot, flanked by rusting containers and trucks long surrendered to decay. The door was metal, chained from the outside with a heavy lock. On the roof, a narrow gap allowed a thread of dim light to pierce through the heavy darkness within. Nathan gave the signal. First team looped left. Second team skirted the right flank. The assault corps held position at the front entrance. Nathan remained with them, command position steady. Axel crouched low in the vehicle beside him, nose twitching in the open air. Then suddenly, his ears snapped upright. Nathan knew that look. "Movement inside?" Axel released a low, almost inaudible growl, followed by a soft, deliberate bark. Not loud, not frantic, but timed with precision. A signal. Not a warning to enemies, but a message to allies. Nathan lowered his visor, lifted 3 fingers into the air. Then 2, then 1. Now! Metal screamed as the chained door exploded outward, wrenched free by hydraulic cutters. In perfect synchrony, flashbangs arced into the warehouse from both flanks, white light erupting like lightning, followed by concussive blasts that shook the air and rattled bones. In the split-second silence that followed, the breach team poured in. Right side clear! Left side clear! Movement in the back! The radios lit up like fireworks. 3 figures fled toward the rear. No time to resist. The backup unit was already there, neutralizing all 3 within seconds. On the warehouse floor lay a scattering of remnants. Wooden crates, small backpacks, torn stuffed animals, and tiny sets of clothes. But far more chilling, bundles of cash tightly wrapped, stacked next to an unopened crate of compact firearms. But Nathan barely noticed, because another sound had seized his heart. A cry, faint, broken, filtering through layers of walls and steel. "There's a child!" someone shouted. Nathan bolted toward the voice. At the far corner stood a narrow room, its wooden door blocked by a rusted metal cabinet. Together with the team, he shoved it aside, forcing their way through. Inside, beneath fractured light from a shattered window, lay a familiar pink blanket, the same one from Axel's backpack. And nestled within it was Laya. No more than a year old, her body filthy, her hair matted, but she was breathing. Her eyes were open, just barely, scanning the world with primal fear. When those eyes met Nathan's, she cried out, not in pain, but in the raw, aching voice of a child who had not felt human contact in far too long. Nathan dropped to his knees, pulled off his gloves, and extended a single finger toward her. She grasped it, instinctively, fiercely, the way children cling to the first strand of light in a world built of shadow. "Infant girl, alive. We need a medic here now," he spoke into the radio. Then he lifted her gently, pressing her trembling body against his chest, wrapping the old blanket around her once more. She was still crying, but now it was not a cry of abandonment. "Check the other side," a voice called. Near the far wall, half concealed behind crates, a steel door was yanked open, and with it came the stench of blood and rot, clinging to the thick, stale air. And there, in the narrow dark, lay Walter Briggs, slumped to one side, one arm shackled tightly to a pipe, dried blood caking his temple. Flashlight beams fell across his face. No reaction. But when the light shifted to his brow, his eyelids fluttered. "Walter?" Nathan rushed in, grabbing his friend's shoulder. "Walter, it's me. It's Nathan." Those eyes opened, barely. Bloodshot, crusted, exhausted beyond speech. But still, they recognized him. "The backpack," Walter rasped, voice like torn paper. Did he get it back?" Nathan clasped his hand, tears burning in his eyes. "Not me, Axel. He brought it home. He brought us here." For a moment something shimmered in Walter's gaze. Relief, disbelief, something near to peace. He let out a breath, half a laugh, half a sob, and closed his eyes again, as if hearing that truth was enough to rest. Medics swarmed in. Walter was freed, stabilized. Laya, still trembling, was now wrapped in thick blankets, held tight in a nurse's arms. Axel had not yet entered. He lay just outside the vehicle, head resting against the door, too weak now to lift it. But when Nathan emerged, the old blanket in hand, he knelt beside him. "We found them, Axel," he whispered. "Walter? And Laya?" Axel didn't move much, just blinked once, slowly. Then, at last, closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but in peace, as if he too had been waiting for this one truth, to finally allow himself to rest. And there, in the damp wind brushing over the grass, with the sirens of salvation rising on the horizon, a soldier in fur. Let go. At the edge of that decaying warehouse, once the epicenter of a hidden crime, there now echoed the sound of urgent footsteps pounding against wet concrete, not in fear, not to escape, but in a desperate rush toward life itself, toward the light that had finally pierced the silence. Inside room 203 of Cedar Ridge County Hospital, the monitors beeped with quiet regularity, syncing with the soft rhythm of rain tapping gently on the window pane. The sharp scent of antiseptic clung to every fiber of the bedsheets, the medical gauze, the plastic tubing, forming an air thick with the constant effort of trying to pull a life back from the brink of death. Walter Briggs lay still in the hospital bed, his right arm immobilized in a brace padded thick with white bandages. His face was pale, but his eyes at last had regained their clarity after hours in a drifting coma. Beside him sat Nathan, his shoulder wrapped with a light dressing from when he crashed through the warehouse door, yet his eyes never once drifted from the man who, not long ago, he thought he might never speak to again. "How long have you known?" Nathan asked, his voice low, deliberate, as if carving each word from the silence between them. Walter exhaled a thin mist into the oxygen mask strapped across his face. His eyelids lowered for a second, like someone trying to rewind a memory he wasn't ready to revisit, then opened again to stare up at the pale ceiling tiles. So empty, so sterile, they felt like the surface of an untold past. "Almost 2 months," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. It started with an anonymous call. A man's voice, cold, unfamiliar, just said one thing. "If you truly want to protect your town, start looking where no one dares to." Nathan narrowed his eyes. "And where did you look?" "The old warehouse is along Route 7's freight line," Walter replied. "Every report said they'd been abandoned since the 70s. But nothing is ever truly abandoned when you see lights on at 2 in the morning, fresh containers swapped out every week, and footprints that never wash away in the rain." He paused, not for breath, but to make sure the storm outside didn't swallow the weight of what he was about to say next. "At first I thought it was drug traffic, but then I saw things that shouldn't be there. Car seats, diapers, little girls' clothes, and a woman's purse with dried blood on the strap." Nathan bowed his head. The silence that filled the room afterward wasn't gentle. It pressed in like mud after a flood, thick and hard to breathe through. "Why didn't you report it?" he asked, softly but with a sharp edge that cut through the room like wire. Walter didn't dodge. "I couldn't. That organization, it's not just here. They've got people on the inside. Every time I tried to pass something up, the person I chose just vanished off the active roster without a trace. I knew that if I moved too soon, they'd know, and if they knew, neither I nor Laya would have any chance." Nathan's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "And Axel?" he asked. Walter managed a thin smile, though his lips were cracked from dehydration. "He was my last option. No one suspects a dog. Axel listens, remembers paths, responds instantly to commands. But more than that, Axel trusted me, without condition." A long stillness followed. The rain tapped on the roof like a metronome marking time. The monitor beside Walter continued its patient beat, like a heart refusing to give up. "I was caught trying to plant the tracker," Walter continued. "3 of them cornered me. I barely had time to grab the backpack. I shoved everything I had into it. A photo I'd taken during a pickup, a blanket I found beside a corner cot, and the USB with all the documentation." Nathan's head jerked up. "Where's the USB?" "In a hidden lining at the bottom of the pack," Walter answered, his voice fading. wrapped in black elastic cord. I didn't know if Axel would make it, but he ran, while they fired at me, and I dropped. Across the hospital, inside the police forensics lab, Technician Gordon sat before a glowing screen, his breath caught in his throat. The small USB drive blinked green in steady pulses. As he opened the first folder, his eyes scanned the screen and widened. Dozens of folders appeared. Trade log 01, camera 03, plates 05, adult-child status, handwritten notes, port docs. He murmured, almost without realizing it. Oh God. He clicked on a video. It was night, grainy, distorted footage from a hidden lens, but clear enough. Adults pushing children, heads bowed, wrists loosely bound, into an unmarked truck with a blacked-out plate. Another file, handwritten logs in both English and Spanish, listing prices, delivery dates, and the names of individual children. "This isn't just a criminal gang," Gordon said into the radio, his voice shaking. "This is a statewide operation, a human trafficking network, and Walter, he just exposed the entire thing." Back in room 203, Nathan answered his phone in silence, nodded once, then ended the call. "The data on the USB," he said quietly, eyes steady on Walter, "is enough to indict at least 5 high-ranking figures within the federal freight system. And Laya, she's one of the few confirmed surviving children we can trace directly." Walter said nothing, but his tears told the story, not from physical pain, but from the quiet, overwhelming relief of finally being forgiven by the friend he had risked everything to protect. Just outside, Axel still lay in the recovery ward, motionless beneath the soft golden halo of a dimmed ceiling lamp. A nurse gently tucked a light blanket over his body. Moments later, Nathan stepped out of Walter's room and sat beside the German shepherd. He didn't speak. He just placed a hand gently on Axel's back, then slowly opened his palm to reveal a small bronze badge, engraved with the words, "K9 Task Unit, Briggs and Axel." Axel didn't need to open his eyes, because in that moment, nothing more needed to be said. The war hadn't ended in the darkness of a warehouse. It had only just begun with the light of a truth that would no longer stay buried. 3 days later, the Portland FBI field office blazed with activity through the night. Every screen in the domestic intelligence room displayed a different branch of the illegal trafficking system that Walter and Axel had traced. Not with technology, but with blood, instinct, and an unrelenting will to protect the innocent. The USB, primitive in format and organized with little more than numbered folders, had become the missing link to an investigation that had spanned years without a single breakthrough. Across vast conference tables lay sprawling maps, pins marking routes, photos of faces no longer just evidence, but portraits of those who had orchestrated the disappearances of more than 60 children over the last 7 years. A transport network using freight trucks with false floors, hidden compartments, and forged manifests. Each warehouse, like the one where Laya had been found, was a stop. Every driver, a cog in the machine, faceless, replaceable, but when connected, leading straight into the heart of an empire of cruelty. The FBI formally entered the case by the next afternoon, when the Oregon Regional Director stood before the press and declared, "A dog named Axel didn't just bring us a backpack. He carried back an indictment for an entire system operating beneath a mask of legitimacy." Back at the county hospital, in Special Recovery Room 2, Axel lingered between breaths. The wound near his left hip had been stitched, but a bullet lodged dangerously close to his spine remained the greatest threat. The surgery had lasted nearly 6 hours, each incision measured down to the millimeter, because even a fraction of error could mean he'd never walk again. Nathan never left the room. He sat by the glass, watching every heartbeat on the monitor. Each time the line dipped, he held his breath. Each time the nurse adjusted the bandage, his hands clenched tighter. And through all of it, not one call, not one briefing, not even duty itself pulled him away. Because to him, Axel was no longer just a K-9. Axel was the last remaining partner of a soldier who could never return to the front lines. "He's fighting again," the veterinarian murmured softly as he stepped outside into the early afternoon light, the sun now spreading gently across the courtyard of the hospital, casting soft shadows on the worn stone tiles. But this time, not because he was told to. This time he's fighting for life. Nathan nodded, his eyes bloodshot from too many sleepless hours, yet unwavering in their depth. "And for Walter," he added, barely louder than the breeze. Inside room 203, Walter was now fully awake. Though his arm was still encased in a splint and bandages, he could sit upright against the headboard, slowly flipping through the investigation summaries, reprinted and sent back from the FBI. On the small table next to his bed, beside a half-finished carton of soy milk, stood a newly framed photograph of Laya. Cleaned, enlarged, and protected by a simple wooden frame. She was asleep in the photo, her face no longer stained with blood, hands resting gently over her chest, as if cradling a peaceful dream. A security officer entered the room, stepping carefully. "They want you to testify formally," he said. Walter gave a faint smile. "I already have, when I handed the backpack to Axel." "Yes, but your testimony, it'll make it impossible for the court to look away." Walter nodded. "I'll say everything, every detail, but not until I see him." "Him?" "Axel." That evening, the recovery room was cleaned and cleared. The lights were dimmed, leaving only one soft yellow bulb glowing gently above the bed. Axel lay on his side, his injured leg suspended in a support sling. The stitches along his flank were neat, the surgical bruises now a long violet line down his side. A nurse replaced his IV one last time, adjusted the monitor, and then quietly stepped out. In the quiet that followed, only Nathan remained, with Axel. He sat by the bed, carefully placing a worn leather collar beside him. The metal tag was scratched from years of service, but the name AXEL was still clearly etched. Next to it, he set a folded cloth embroidered with the K-9 task unit emblem, freshly laundered but still marked faintly with the red stains of the day Axel had returned. Nathan leaned in, his voice low and steady. "We've begun, Axel, and everything you and Walter fought for, everything you held in that pack, it's burning now. The FBI is unraveling every piece. Walter is alive, and Laya, she's safe." Axel didn't open his eyes, but then, just for a moment, his ear twitched. A tiny movement like the ripple of wind on a silent lake. "You don't need to return to the battlefield," Nathan went on, "but if you make it through this, there's a different path ahead. No more chases, no more hiding. This time, your job will be healing. Because I believe, deep in your eyes, there's something even greater than the hunter's instinct. There's trust." Just then, a soft knock echoed at the door. Nathan rose and opened it. Walter stepped in, still weak, leaning on a cane. Neither man said a word. They didn't need to. Walter walked forward, slowly, every step measured, and knelt beside the bed. His hand, shaking, bruised, found its way to the soft fur along Axel's cheek. "He's still with me." The overhead light bathed their silhouettes in warm gold, creating a scene that none of them, two men and a dog, ever thought they would live to see again. Walter sank slowly into the chair beside the bed, his breathing labored but even, his eyes never leaving Axel, who remained still, his lower body wrapped tight in surgical dressings and held by a recovery brace. The room filled with the steady pulse of the monitor, each digital beep a gentle knock from fate, as if something miraculous was quietly unfolding in real time. Walter didn't speak at first. He just rested his hand on Axel's neck, where once a metal tag had hung, carrying the name of a unit, a mission, a purpose. That neck had once lowered in obedience during training, lifted high in chaos, pushed forward through the thin veil between life and death. And now it rested gently in layers of sterile linen, like a warrior who had laid down his shield. Nathan, silent, handed Walter a folded medical report. He didn't speak as Walter took it, unfolding the pages with slow care, reading line by line. "He's out of danger," the doctor had written, "but nerve damage at the left hip is permanent. Motor function may recover partially. However, Axel will never again be able to perform high-intensity duties, pursuits, or operations under extreme conditions." Walter gripped the page tighter, but instead of grief, a strange calmness softened his features. Maybe it was something he'd already prepared for. Maybe, deep down, he knew that what had been lost would never outweigh what Axel had saved. For this town? For that girl? For them all. He turned to Nathan, his voice hoarse but firm. "He's still the strongest warrior I've ever known, not because of what he could do, but because he chose to come back, even knowing he might never go again." Axel stirred faintly. Whether from a dream or the nearness of someone he knew, no one could tell. Walter leaned closer, whispering, "No one expects you to live like before, Axel. But this life, the one you fought to hold on to, we'll honor it every single day." Nathan watched the moment in silence, something inside him easing for the first time in days. He no longer saw a wounded dog lying in a hospital bed. He saw a living symbol of unshakable loyalty, of quiet sacrifice, and, more than anything, of a wordless love between a man and the creature who had followed him through every shadow. From that day on, Axel's recovery was no longer just a medical journey. It became something of spirit, of soul. In the beginning, he remained still, blinking slowly only when someone approached. But by the second week, Axel had begun to rest his head gently on Nathan's leg during morning newspaper readings. And by the third, he pushed himself, using his right front leg, to drag his body towards the hospital window each afternoon, just to sit beneath the golden light that spilled through the glass, painting soft amber pools across the cold tile floor. Walter came every afternoon, never missing a single day, even though he still needed a cane to walk, and even on the days when his leg ached or his breath was short, and even on the days when the sky turned gray before sunset. Sometimes he would simply sit quietly by the bedside, his voice soft, recounting old cases, the awkward fumbling days of early training, or those small, almost forgotten stories that only he and Axel would remember, fragments of a shared world that required no translation. And every time he spoke, Axel's eyes seemed to shine just a little brighter. His ears stayed perked just a little longer, and even the faintest flick of his tail seemed to warm the entire hospital room, like a flicker of life rekindled from embers. One late afternoon, as Nathan stepped into the ward, a nurse approached him with a quiet but noticeable spark in her voice. "Axel tried to stand today," she said. "He managed to hold himself up on 3 legs. It wasn't steady, but no one helped him." Nathan approached and found Axel lying down, breathing evenly, his chest rising and falling with calm resolve. He sat beside him, gently peeling back the adhesive along his side, replacing the bandage with hands both careful and reverent. As the gauze came away, the scar revealed itself. Long, precise, healed over but still pink with memory. The wound had closed, but the memory, that would take longer. "The injury's healed," Nathan whispered, "but the one in his heart, I think only time and love can mend that." The doctor entered then, holding a small form in his hand. He offered Nathan a smile, not formal but warm, and extended the paper toward him. "We've made a unanimous decision," he said. "Axel will no longer be classified under the active K-9 division, but he can continue serving the community, just in a different way. This is a nomination form to transition Axel into a certified special therapy dog for trauma survivors, especially children." Nathan took the form, reading each line slowly, deliberately, as if each word were a thread sewing something new into the future. When he reached the final sentence, he turned to look at Axel, not asking, not requesting, but seeking, with quiet reverence, a nod of approval from a companion who had shared far more than duty. Axel blinked once, then inhaled softly. Nathan signed. And somewhere behind him, Walter let out a quiet laugh. And for the first time since the warehouse incident, there was sunlight in that laughter. From that moment onward, no one in Cedar Ridge saw Axel as an injured K-9 lying in a hospital bed anymore. In their eyes, he became something else entirely. Something rare, almost mythic, a living testament to loyalty that defied procedure, a silent parable woven from the threads of pain, and something close to grace. The application for Axel's new designation was sent out within hours, and in just 3 days, his name began appearing on the news. At first, it was a modest column in the local reports section of a small Oregon paper. K-9 returns with evidence-laden backpack, aids in rescue of missing officer and infant girl. But within 24 hours, the story took flight, riding the winds of digital breath, crossing state lines, rising onto national broadcasts. Headlines began to emerge, first tentative, then triumphant. K-9 risks life to save fellow officer. Axel, the unarmed hero. 1 backpack, 1 dog, and the takedown of an entire criminal operation. Afternoon radio programs began dedicating segments to recounting the details. His bark that triggered the raid, the way he clung to the backpack with blood-soaked jaws as he collapsed on the station floor. People didn't talk about Axel as a dog who completed his mission. They spoke of him as something deeper, a symbol, perhaps, or a quiet force of nature, an embodiment of courage that asked for no applause. The story resonated not because it was sensational, but because it was real. A dog who could not speak, could not explain, who simply did the right thing at the one moment when everything seemed lost. And that, somehow, was enough to make an entire nation pause, if only briefly, to look back at a creature once labeled a tool of service. Back in Cedar Ridge, the police station phone rang almost non-stop. Some called to ask about Axel's recovery. Some called to thank the team. Others asked how they could donate toward his medical bills. But more than anything, the station received letters, hundreds of them, and drawings. Most came from children. One afternoon, a large postal truck pulled up to the precinct gate. Not the routine delivery van, but a special vehicle dispatched from the regional office, carrying sealed sacks of mail marked in large, bold letters. For Axel, Cedar Ridge PD. Officer Doyle was the first to step out and receive the bags. Opening one, he found it packed with colored envelopes, some folded into the shape of dog heads, filled with crooked handwriting and pure-hearted words like, "I wish I had a dog like Axel. I drew this for you because you're brave. Mom said you saved a baby, so I'm sending my gum." A girl named Molly from Texas sent not only a handwritten card, but a small teddy bear with a note that read, "If you can't hug him, let someone hug him for you. His name is Henry. I hug him when I'm sad." Inside the station, a new board was added to the wall, 3 large letters handwritten in red across the top. Axel the Brave. Beneath it, each drawing, each letter, each tiny token was pinned in place. A temporary museum of gratitude and quiet awe. Nathan selected a few of the letters and brought them to the hospital. When he sat beside Axel, now alert and able to lift his front legs just enough to turn toward him, he began to read, slowly, 1 line at a time. Axel didn't understand the words, But when Nathan described a picture, a curly-haired girl who had drawn him shielding a baby in the rain with his body, Axel gently wagged his tail. Not wildly, not urgently, but just enough. Enough for Nathan to curl his fingers slightly, like someone catching hold of something too precious to let slip through their grasp. Walter stepped in then, carrying a small wooden frame. He hung it just above Axel's bed. Inside was the only letter embroidered by hand, the thread a soft pink. Thank you for keeping the most important thing alive, life. That room, though small, quiet, and painted in shades of soft white, now carried within its walls the breath of hundreds of tiny hearts scattered across the country, as if the air itself had become a gentle witness to a legacy no words were needed to explain. There was no need for a press conference, no need to record or repeat anything, because the only thing that mattered was there, unmistakable, shining in Axel's eyes. No longer weary, no longer clouded by pain, but instead aglow with something that resembled a flicker of new belief, a quiet certainty that what had been done was understood and received. And somewhere far beyond this little town, as night quietly fell across the land, people still spoke of him, not with medals or ranks, not with fanfare or ceremony, but simply by the name the children had given him, Axel the Brave. When Axel's condition had stabilized, the official certificate of honorable retirement was delivered to the Cedar Ridge Police Department, bearing the signature of a state police representative and the embossed seal of the High Command K-9 Training Division. It was framed in oak, protected behind non-reflective glass, and nestled carefully in a deep blue velvet box, modest in form, but filled with a solemn grace, much like the life of the dog it celebrated. His send-off was held on the small back lawn of the station, not with trumpets or cameras, but with the quiet presence of those who had walked beside him through the storm, a few old friends, several officers from the unit, Walter, Nathan, and others whose paths had crossed Axel's during those most harrowing hours. They stood in a circle, offering soft applause as Axel was led out with a gentle brown cloth leash, not the rigid tactical kind, but something easier, warmer. Around his neck hung a new tag, simple and unranked, bearing just one line: Axel, companion and comfort. After the quiet farewell, Axel was transferred to Cedar Pines Retirement Home, a small facility on the southern edge of town where the thinning tree line met wide, dry meadows. The two-story red brick building, with black roof tiles and wide windows that opened onto a garden paved with stone paths, had long been home to veterans, the elderly, and those who, for whatever reason, had no one left to wait for them. On the day Axel arrived, few paid attention. The elderly, accustomed to change, rarely expected much from it. Some glanced over when the medical transport van pulled up. A few looked curiously as the German Shepherd stepped down, his left leg still stiff, moving slowly but never hesitating. Most, however, returned to their unfinished games of chess, their half-heard songs on the radio, or simply sat silently on wooden benches, staring out at the garden as they had so many days before. Axel didn't try to draw attention. He moved quietly through the long hallways, pausing by windows that caught the sun, lying down for a moment before rising again. Each day, he made his rounds at the same hour, visiting rooms with the nursing staff or with Walter, who had now quietly chosen to retire there as well, greeting each resident, each veteran, each soul who had forgotten why they were still here. The first person Axel approached was Mr. Truman, a Korean War veteran who had suffered traumatic memory loss and no longer spoke to anyone. He spent his days seated silently beside his window, staring at a wilted pot of bougainvillea. But when Axel lay down at his feet, doing nothing but breathing softly, eyes half closed as if simply listening, Mr. Truman reached out and rested his hand gently on the dog's head. No one said a word. But that afternoon, for the first time in 3 years, he asked for fresh bed linens. A week later, Mrs. Corinne, a widowed woman plagued by chronic insomnia, was found smiling as she whispered bedtime stories to Axel at 3 a.m. They sat in the reading room, the soft golden light above them glowing like a fading lantern, her voice low and tender. "You know, I once had a dog like you, but he didn't live very long. You, though, you're something special, aren't you?" And so, day by day, Axel moved through every hallway, every creaking stair, every porch swing that still dared to sway. He didn't do anything extraordinary. He just listened. Sat still, watched quietly. If someone looked his way, he met their gaze. If a trembling hand reached out, he leaned into it as if to say, "I'm here. You're not alone." Soon, the facility's internal schedule included a new entry: Quiet Hour with Axel, reserved for residents with communication difficulties or psychological distress. There were no charts to measure the results, but every nurse began to say the same thing. No one could make Mr. McAllister laugh until Axel. Or, after 3 months of nightly screaming, Miss Lydia finally sleeps, because Axel lies beside her bed. Axel never said a word, but the paw prints he left in that place became soft punctuation marks at the ends of many stories that had once seemed destined to finish in silence. He no longer chased criminals, no longer leapt from patrol cars into stormy nights, no longer barked sharp commands in the dark. But he was still serving, in a way that was gentler, quieter, and no less profound. On Nathan's first visit after the transfer, he stood at the hallway's edge and watched the scene unfold. Axel resting beside Walter's feet, with Mr. Truman dozing off beside them in a wheelchair. The room had no alarms, no armor, no weapons. Yet, in that peaceful space, Nathan saw it clearly. This soldier was still on duty. And this time, the mission was final: to hold together the fading fragments of memory, simply by being present, without needing to explain a thing. The very next morning, just as sunlight touched the leaves outside the front porch of Cedar Pines, the receptionist placed a thin envelope on the intake counter. It came from no official agency, no newspaper, no admirer from the police station. Scrawled in uneven blue marker across the front was a line written in the square, focused strokes of a child's hand, each letter drawn with care, as if the sender had leaned in close to make every curve count. "To the dog with the eyes that speak." A nurse delivered the envelope during midday rounds. Walter was reading to Ms. Lydia, his voice slow and patient, while Axel lay quietly by the window, the light slanting through the glass and falling gently across the fur on his back, where the scars had begun to fade. The nurse bent down, holding the envelope toward Axel's nose. "You've got mail, hero," he whispered, so softly it felt like the words might disappear into the air if not heard. Axel opened his eyes, not with a sudden stir, not with any burst of energy, but with a quiet presence that felt almost human in its stillness. And when the envelope was gently laid upon the wooden floor beside him, he slowly turned his body, extending his muzzle forward, nudging the edge of the paper. Not scratching, not biting, but with a touch so soft, so deliberate, that it became clear something in that envelope carried a presence he had been waiting for. Walter stopped reading. He turned his head, and the moment his gaze fell upon the handwriting, it froze. He didn't need to ask. He knew. And in a breath held between memory and realization, he opened the envelope, his hands as careful as if he were unwrapping a fragile dream not yet fully awakened. Inside was a drawing, wax crayon on plain paper. The image was of a dog, gray-brown in color, with upright ears, and a pair of large eyes rendered in the two deepest shades the box had to offer, ocean blue and coal black. Beneath the sketch, in unsteady handwriting, were the words, I don't remember your voice, but I remember those eyes. The eyes that told me everything was going to be okay. Laya. Walter said nothing. He passed the drawing to Nathan, then gently laid it across the back of Axel's paw, his palm turned upward in quiet offering. Axel moved his nose again, this time slower, longer, resting it on the paper for several seconds. No one had taught him how to respond. No one expected him to understand. And yet somehow, inexplicably, every person in the room felt the same truth settle over them. He did. From somewhere far away, a child not yet 3 had drawn his eyes, not because they were sharp or striking, but because within them, she had once found a safety so powerful that even her panic, even her trauma, had paused to breathe. The drawing was later framed in a small wooden border and hung just above Axel's bed. Everyone who entered the room saw it. And everyone knew. It wasn't just a child's picture. It was a thread connecting the blood-soaked memory of that night to the quiet now. A proof, delicate but enduring, that sometimes the quietest acts leave the deepest marks. In the days that followed, the staff at the care home began to notice small changes, subtle but impossible to ignore. Axel would pause longer beside the more withdrawn residents, the ones who rarely spoke or made eye contact. One afternoon, he lay down at the feet of Mr. Hayes, a man who hadn't uttered a word since arriving. When the nurse returned, the old man was mumbling softly. Those eyes. I've seen them before. I think it was Saigon, 1969. Another time, an elderly woman long trapped in the haze of Alzheimer's reached out, her fingers trembling, and wrapped her arms gently around Axel's neck, whispering, "He looks like Lucky, but the eyes aren't like anyone else's." No one insisted that Axel understood every word, but everyone believed that there was something in those eyes, something beyond language, a kind of listening that required no answers, a kind of presence that made explanations irrelevant. By the end of the month, the nursing staff tallied their reports and found something quietly miraculous. Over 70% of the residents had shown signs of deeper sleep, reduced agitation, and lighter emotional episodes within just 3 weeks of Axel's daily visits. A plain number on paper, but behind it were nights less lonely, dreams guarded by the warmth of a creature who asked for nothing, who lay quietly by their side, breathing steadily. Axel didn't need to know what he had changed. He simply lay there, listening to stories, nudging his nose into a trembling hand when comfort was needed, and holding, in his gaze, the same calm that once convinced a kidnapped child the world could still be safe. Nathan visited on weekends. He sat beside him, reading aloud Laya's latest message, this time a heart-shaped card, hand-cut, with a drawing of Axel lying in the middle of a flower garden. "I added flowers," she wrote, "because I think you're in a place with sunshine and kind people." Axel tilted his head. Just a little. But enough to make Nathan pause, to feel his throat catch. In the soft hush of the care home, as afternoon wind drifted down quiet hallways, a story continued, not with grand new chapters, but with gentle moments that asked only for someone willing to stop, look into the dog's eyes, and feel something unnamed but utterly real. And there, in that place, Axel was no longer a pursuit-trained canine, no longer a national headline or the face of a news cycle. He was simply himself, a dog with eyes that remembered, eyes that listened, eyes that held memory for those who had forgotten what it felt like to be held. That morning began like any other. In the shared common room, Mrs. Corinne was knitting quietly, Mr. Truman dozed with an open book across his chest, and Axel lay by the window, his head resting on a small pillow embroidered with his name in red thread. The sunlight filtered through the glass, casting the shadow of his upright ears onto the floor like the sails of a ship adrift in calm waters. Then came the soft sound of wheels turning at the end of the hall. No one noticed at first. In a place like this, the sound of wheelchairs or carts was hardly rare. But Axel noticed. His head didn't lift, but his ears turned slightly, instinctively, tilting toward the approaching sound. A reflex never lost, even as age and injury wore down the body it lived inside. And then the door opened, slowly, but with quiet certainty. Walter stepped in. He no longer carried a cane. His stride was still unsure, but his eyes were different. They no longer burned red with pain, no longer echoed hollow with the weight of loss. He wore the old jacket from their late-night K9 shifts, and in his hand he held no files, no reports, only a simple strip of faded fabric, weathered by time. The first training lead he had ever used, the one he clipped to Axel's collar on their very first day together, 4 years ago. The room held still. Mr. Truman opened his eyes. Mrs. Corinne paused her knitting. The nurse by the door took a single step back. Axel slowly lifted his head, not quickly, not confusedly, but with a stillness carved from recognition. He looked, long and deep, and everything else simply faded away. And then, slowly, almost like surfacing from a long-forgotten dream, Axel rose. One leg dragged behind, but the other 3 pressed firm to the ground with a trembling resolve, and his eyes, those same eyes that had once stared down chaos without blinking, now fixed steadily on the man approaching. That man, whose voice once commanded him through fire, who had once shouted into the storm, then whispered, "Live," with his last breath. When only a few steps separated them, Walter stopped. His hand trembled as he held up a small collar, raising it to Axel's eye level with the fragile reverence of someone holding a memory too precious to speak aloud. "You remember this?" he asked, voice hoarse, barely held together by breath and ache. Axel stepped forward, just once. Walter sank to his knees. "The first day at base camp," he continued, voice quieter now, steadier somehow. "I clipped this onto your neck. You were small, stubborn, snapping at the leash like it had insulted you. But when I put my hand on your neck and said, 'Easy, it's just you and me,' you stopped. And right then I knew. You weren't just another working dog. You were the friend I never dared to believe I deserved." Axel stood still, unmoving, but something shifted in his eyes, something soft, wet, and wordless, like a shared memory bubbling to the surface without ever needing to be named. They were back there again, both of them, in the silent red dirt yards of training, in the endless midnight drives where only static and steady breath filled the space between them, in the chaos where there had always been one constant, one anchor. And that anchor, even now, knelt before him. Walter leaned closer and gently slipped the collar back around Axel's neck. It didn't fit quite like before. His neck was broader now, the fur thinner, darkened with time, but it clicked into place with a soft metallic snap. And for a moment, the entire room seemed to still. "This is yours. From the beginning. And until the very end," Walter whispered, eyes glassy but dry. Axel stepped forward again. His nose brushed against Walter's chest, and in that moment, the dam broke. Walter wrapped his arms around the dog's head, not like hugging a service animal, not like embracing a soldier, but like cradling something deeply personal, something that had once been lost and now, impossibly, returned. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The room filled only with the sound of breathing, heavy and uneven. Yet every person nearby understood. In that embrace was everything: grief, gratitude, friendship, and a love that defied the boundaries of language or species. After that reunion, Walter chose to stay. Not as a patient, not as a guest, but as a part-time support volunteer at the home. Not because he needed something to do, but because he needed to remain close to Axel, to walk beside him a little longer. He helped tend the garden, chatted with the elderly, and every afternoon, he and Axel would wander out into the little yard behind the facility, where stone benches sat among clusters of soft lavender, always blooming pale and fragrant. No one at the facility ever questioned it. They simply noticed that from that day forward, the therapy dog was calmer, less startled by thunder, and lingered longer beside the quietest residents. Perhaps it was because Axel understood now that the piece of his past he thought he had lost had returned. Returned in the warmth of a familiar voice, in the grounding of a well-worn touch, in the rhythm of a heartbeat so close it could be felt through fur and bone. The home he never stopped seeking, no matter how far he'd gone. That silent return, and the peaceful days that followed, slowly turned Axel's story into something more than news headlines or fleeting articles. It became woven into the living memory of Cedar Ridge itself. From the corner coffee shop to the oldest barbershop on Main Street, there was always someone retelling the story of the dog who came back alone, through blood and silence, only to later become the quiet friend to those who had no one left in the last pages of their lives. When autumn came, gilding the forest that circled the town in shades of fire and gold, the Cedar Ridge Council made an official announcement. A bronze statue would be erected in Axel's honor, right in the center square, a place once home to farmers' markets, winter festivals, and end-of-summer concerts. It wasn't a place reserved for war memorials or public spectacles, but it was a place every person passed through at least once a week. A modest place, a solid one, just like the path Axel had walked. The ceremony was set for a crisp Sunday, the kind where the breeze starts to carry the scent of burning leaves and maple canopies begin to drop their first soft spirals to the earth. By early morning, the square filled quietly. Families arrived with children, some clutching hand-drawn cards of thanks. Others came on foot, with walkers or wheelchairs, including the very residents of Cedar Pines where Axel now lived. And there, in the middle of it all, Axel rested at Walter's feet, head leaned gently against his leg, eyes closed, but ears attentive, as if listening for the weight of every footstep, every breath, every unspoken thank you. A white cloth covered the statue, bound with a red ribbon. Around it, simple wooden chairs formed a half-circle. A small pine stage had been set up in front, and atop it stood a hand-carved wooden sign that read, "Axel, the one who heard the unspoken call." Walter was invited to speak. He walked slowly to the microphone, carrying nothing but a thin band of cord wrapped around his wrist. The same design as the first collar he'd ever placed around Axel's neck. He looked out at the crowd, hundreds of eyes looking back at him, but the only gaze he held was Axel's, still down by the stage, unmoving, alert, eyes locked onto the man speaking. Then Walter began, not loudly, not theatrically, just with enough strength to reach the farthest row. "Someone once asked me, why did Axel come back with that backpack? Who gave the order?" He paused. The wind rustled through an old man's thinning hair in the front row. "The answer is, no one. No one ordered him. Axel doesn't follow commands. He follows his heart." The applause that followed didn't erupt. It bloomed. Gentle, genuine, like warmth spreading slowly from person to person. A quiet ripple of appreciation, not just for what had been done, but for why. Walter gave a faint nod, then stepped back a single pace, the quiet gesture both solemn and reverent. The old sculptor stepped forward, his hands steady as he reached for the slender ribbon, pulling it with care, as though unveiling not just a statue, but a memory etched in metal and silence. The white cloth fell. Slowly, like a feather landing after a long journey through the wind. And then, there it was. the bronze statue of Axel, seated upright, posture firm yet calm, head tilted ever so slightly forward as if listening, attentive, present, and alert. Between his jaws, held gently but securely, was the strap of a small backpack resting at his feet. His eyes, oh, the eyes, had been sculpted with such delicate precision that one could almost see a faint glimmer of light captured within them. That same soft gleam from the day he had appeared at the precinct. Unapologetic, unwavering, asking for no permission, offering no explanation, carrying only what needed to be trusted. A boy, no older than 7, was the first to step forward. He came with his mother, clutching in his hands a watercolor painting, a child's rendering of that very statue, with crooked handwriting scrawled beneath, "Thank you for not giving up." He placed the drawing at the statue's base, looked up, and then, without a word, wrapped his small arms around the statue's neck, his entire body pressing into the bronze as though trying to feel its warmth. He said nothing. But in that moment, a dozen other children rushed forward too. Some left cookies, some clung tightly to the statue's legs, some leaned in and whispered, "Hi, Axel," as if the real dog were right there, breathing, watching, listening to every word. Axel watched it all, from just a few steps away. He didn't move, but his ears stood tall, his eyes following the children's every motion, not as a spectator, but as a sentinel, one who recognized the weight of what had been entrusted to him. And when one little girl turned back, ran toward the real Axel, knelt beside him, and reached out her hand to stroke his head, he didn't turn away, as he often had in recent months. He leaned into her touch, slow and still, his breath calm and even. His eyes blinked once, softly, and Walter, still standing behind him, simply smiled. That day, the sunset lingered longer than usual, as if the light itself had paused to witness something sacred. The golden haze settled gently upon the tousled hair of children, the sloped shoulders of elders, and the noble curve of the bronze sculpture's head. A few residents from the care home were wheeled out, sitting quietly before the statue they had only heard stories of, now finally able to see it with their own eyes. And in the midst of it all, the real dog, of flesh, of breath, of pain long endured, remained lying there, not at the center of the ceremony, but on its quiet edge, not upon a podium or beneath a spotlight, but beneath the shade of a tree, where the soil was soft and the sunlight warm enough for a soul who had weathered storms to rest without needing permission. There were no trumpets, no medals pinned, only a gentle glance from an old friend, a child's embrace from someone he had never met, and a whisper that floated on the breeze like something timeless. He didn't follow orders, he followed his heart. That phrase, first spoken on the wooden stage in the center of Cedar Ridge, had since taken root in every corner of the town, like a quiet spell that didn't require explanation, only belief. And as the years drifted forward, unannounced and unasked for, carrying with them red-leafed autumns and snowless winters, and the barely audible shifts of the earth's breath, one truth remained unchanged. Axel was still there. He no longer moved with the speed of old. His steps were slower now, his left hind leg often stiff with morning chill. The once thick coat that had gleamed under the sun was graying around his muzzle. His tail had thinned, and the gentle shine in his eyes had begun to soften at the corners with the haze of age. And yet, every time a new resident arrived at the care home, an elderly man transferred from a neighboring town, a woman recently discharged from cardiac rehab, or a war veteran who had finally stepped away from the battlefield of his memories, Axel was always the first to greet them. No one needed to call him. No one gave him commands. All it took was the quiet presence of a stranger sitting silently in the corner of a room, or the faint sound of a sigh carried down the hallway, and Axel would push himself up, carefully, one step at a time, and make his way toward them, lying down slowly at their feet, without leash, without collar, without expectation, offering only his presence, a stillness that said, "I'm here, and I won't leave." No one had ever taught him that, but from everything he had been through, from the wind that once howled through his fractured ribs on the cold cement floor of that warehouse, to Walter's final whisper crackling through a broken radio, he had learned this. When people are at their most fragile, what they need most is not saving, but someone brave enough to stay. At the Cedar Ridge police station, Nathan was still on active duty, now the lead instructor for the newly formed K-9 unit, and every year, when a new class of recruits was inducted, there was one afternoon carved into the training calendar, an unlisted session known simply as the lesson that's not in the handbook. That afternoon, the recruits would be led to the old assembly room behind the training field. No blackboards, no slides, just a dusty radio set placed at the center of the table. Nathan would enter, white shirt, calm voice, and ask one question. "Has anyone here heard the story of a dog named Axel?" Some would nod. Some would shake their heads. But none of them knew that they weren't just about to hear a story. They were about to be taken back to the moment everything began. Nathan would turn on the radio. The static would hum. And then, breaking through the noise, came the crackling fragments of a voice. "They took the girl. If I don't, make it back. Axel, take this home. Don't come back." The room would fall silent. Nathan wouldn't explain. He would just sit and speak. Not from a page, not from a screen, but from memory, telling the whole story. The moment the precinct doors swung open, the way Axel's eyes never left the GPS signal, the single bark before the team stormed the warehouse. He would speak like someone who had seen it all and still couldn't reach the end without feeling something deep stir within him. And when he finished, he would always end the same way. "We train K-9S to follow commands, but sometimes what saves us is what they do beyond instruction, when they act not because we told them to, but because their heart whispered what was right." After every storytelling session, the group would be quietly led to the town square, where the bronze statue of Axel still stood, untarnished by time, not because metal does not age, but because the people of Cedar Ridge refused to let it. They wiped it down with care, touched up its paint when needed, and left tiny offerings at its feet. A rubber bone, a handkerchief, a crayon drawing taped to a folded paper heart. Walter, though no longer one to speak before crowds, still came every year on the evening of June 14th, the day Axel had returned to the station with a blood-soaked backpack and the weight of a town's unanswered questions. He would sit quietly on the wooden bench behind the statue, a small oak box beside him holding the old wristband he once wore during deployment. He needed no companion. He needed no audience. Just time. And Axel. Back at Cedar Pines, each Saturday evening, the newly assigned nurse would continue the tradition of reading aloud Laya's letters that never stopped arriving, month after month, year after year, from the girl who once called him the dog with the eyes that speak. She was no longer a child now. Her drawings had improved, her handwriting had grown more graceful, but in every letter, she kept the same opening line. "How are you, old friend? Today I want to tell you a story." Axel no longer walked the full length of the hallway each day. His pace was slower now, his limbs stiffer, but whenever he heard the rolling wheels of a new patient's bed or the creak of a door opening at dusk, he would try to rise, even if just to take a few steps before lying down again. And somehow, every new arrival understood instantly. The creature at their feet was not just a therapy dog, but a story that was still being lived, quietly, patiently, with the rhythm of an aging heart that had never once stopped beating for others. One early spring afternoon, when the breeze carried the scent of lavender through the garden behind the facility, Walter opened Axel's door and simply gave him a look. No words, no coaxing, just a silent signal. And Axel, as he always had, understood. Today was different. He rose carefully, his 3 good legs steady, the 4th tucked slightly, but not left behind. Step by step, he followed Walter through the narrow back path that led away from the building and toward the hillside, where a small stream wove its way gently through the earth. The water ran clear, bubbling softly over smooth stones, catching the golden hour light and scattering it like confetti over the moss-lined banks. 2 willow trees leaned in from either side, their branches forming a delicate canopy overhead, as if nature itself had framed this moment in advance. Axel inhaled deeply, his nose catching the damp earth, the soft grass, the scent of spring's return. He reached the large stone near the edge of the water and sat. Walter joined him, lowering himself with the slow care of a man whose body remembered every year of service, and placed a hand on Axel's head, stroking it with the instinct of a bond that never needed to be rehearsed. No one spoke. The wind blew gently, the water hummed its lullaby, and time, for a moment, stood still at the edge of the stream. Then a voice, clear and light, called out from the trail behind, "I made it!" Walter turned. A girl, 12 now, her ponytail tied back, her small purple backpack snug against her shoulders, came running toward them, arms clutching something wrapped in paper. As she neared, she slowed to a respectful pace, then knelt beside Axel. She didn't cry out. She didn't rush. She just placed her hand gently on his neck, as if neither of them had been apart even for a season. Laya, the same child who once lay cradled in Axel's rescue, pulled from a warehouse soaked in smoke and blood, had grown taller, stronger, older. But her eyes, that gaze, and the way she touched him were unchanged. And once again, no words were needed. No one questioned how she had found her way here. No one wondered why Axel tilted his head, then leaned softly into her shoulder, as if it were the safest place in the world. From her backpack, Laya pulled out a small notebook, covered in sticker drawings and taped edges, filled with the letters she had sent over the years. She flipped open to the first page, then, slowly, to the last. It showed a colored sketch, a dog sitting by a stream beside a girl, both smiling beneath willow trees. Below it was a line written in the careful pen of someone who had rewritten it more than once. "One day, I'll bring my stories to you in person, and when I put my hand on your neck, you'll understand everything." Walter read it silently, his eyes reddening, his breath catching just once before he placed a hand on Laya's shoulder, not to guide her, but simply to anchor the moment. No one said a word. The world hushed itself, making room for the steady beat beneath Axel's fur, a heartbeat like a slow, deliberate drum, carrying the weight of a life well lived to its final cadence. Laya wrapped her arms around Axel's neck, resting her cheek against the fur that had turned the color of winter frost. "I missed you," she whispered, not with the voice of a child, but with the strength of someone learning how to carry beauty without breaking. Axel didn't bark. He didn't shift. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't need to. The way he sat there, calm, unmoving, eyes watching the water slip past the rocks, was all the answer the world needed. It was complete. It was enough. No one recorded that afternoon. No cameras snapped. But in the hearts of those present, Walter, Laya, and Axel, it was sealed as clearly as ink on parchment. The murmur of the stream, the rustle of the grass, and the pulse of a dog who once sprinted through the line between life and death. now sitting in stillness, closing the last chapter of a life of service with nothing but presence. Axel closed his eyes, breathing steadily, his head resting once again in the curve of Laya's lap. And just then, a flock of sparrows passed overhead, chirping gently as they dipped down to the nearest willow, perching as if listening, as if hearing it too, the sound of courage, not loud like thunder, not sharp like a bugle, just the quiet, even breath of a heart that had loved deeply and lived fully. No one needed to tell the story. All that mattered was that someone remembered and sat down beside him just once.